Ethan Harper stood at the edge of his modest home in northern Saskatchewan, watching the gray clouds roll in across the horizon. The foreboding weather mirrored the state of the world. Days had turned into weeks, and the news reports were increasingly grim. Reports of a pandemic that had swept across continents like wildfire. The tranquility of his small town was shattered by the rise of panic, with neighbors hoarding supplies as fear seeped into everyday life. The once bustling Main Street now lay eerily quiet. Ethan could scarcely recognize the face of the town where he'd grown up. It was enveloped in an unsettling stillness punctuated only by the occasional wail of sirens or the distant thud of military trucks rolling through. Even in those unsettling days, Ethan had clung to hope. Morning conversations with his wife, Claire, had become a lifeline, filled with reassurances and the mundane realities of life that grounded him. But as external pressures mounted, their conversations shifted from the lighthearted to the pragmatic, a plan to escape, to flee the encroaching chaos. The tipping point came on a cold afternoon when the government issued a formal quarantine. The streets were empty, people afraid to leave their homes. That very evening, with the moon rising high, Ethan gathered his things: an axe, a hunting rifle, and a few belongings that mattered most. It was with a heavy heart that he turned his back on their cozy home, its warmth now a memory, and slipped into the sheltering embrace of the forest. Part 2. Life Alone. The forest enveloped him as he journeyed deeper into its heart, a realm of towering pines and rustling leaves that offered both refuge and a stark reminder of his solitude. Days turned into months as he painstakingly built a log cabin from the timber around him. His hands were rough and calloused from labor, but with each log he placed, he found purpose amidst the despair that had lodged in his throat. Nature became both his ally and teacher. He learned to forage for edible plants, to track animals, and to blend into the tranquility that was both haunting and liberating. The seasons changed, each bringing a new challenge. Bitter chills in winter that bit at his skin, the vibrant rebirth of spring that turned the forest into a canvas of life, the heat of summer that left him thirsting for cool streams, and the harvest of fall that painted the landscape in hues of gold and crimson. Yet the isolation wore on him like a heavy cloak. Night after night, the cabin creaked and groaned, the forest echoing back his thoughts. Memories of Claire, her laughter, the way her eyes sparkled during shared moments, floated in and out of his consciousness like phantoms. The absence of her warmth made the cabin feel hollow, an echo chamber for his longing. It was during the long winter months that darkness threatened to consume him. He had gnarled wood for fire, but the flame flickered weakly against the cold winds. There were nights when desperation clawed at him, whispering that she could still be out there, that they could reunite if he just had the courage to look. But, ultimately, he chose the comfort of solitude, convinced that isolation was better than facing the truth of the outside world. Part 3. The Glimpse of Others. 3 years into this self-imposed exile, Ethan was out hunting one crisp afternoon when he caught a glimpse of movement, figures weaving through the trees. They were a group, their voices punctuating the tranquil stillness of the woods. Heart pounding in his chest, he crouched low behind a fallen log, instincts screaming at him to remain hidden. His heart raced with a mix of dread and curiosity. He peered through the underbrush, watching as they laughed and interacted like old friends, vivid contrasts to his life of silence. He had lived for so long out of earshot of any human interaction that the sight both thrilled and terrified him. Who were they? Were they like him, or were they the harbingers of danger? Ethan held his breath, watching them blend into the forest, their laughter fading as they pushed deeper into the woods. Weeks passed, the sight of them replaying in his mind endlessly. He wanted to approach, to connect. Yet an instinct fear tethered him in place, paralyzing his desire to reach out. Eventually, even their laughter faded from memory, and he returned to the haunting sounds of wind and solitude. As the days grew longer, Ethan wrestled with the notion of facing the world again. The people he had seen ignited a flicker of hope, sparking a relentless desire to know what lay beyond his secluded existence. He thought more on the family he had left behind, his wife, Claire, who he had to believe was alive. Each night he wrestled with the crippling loneliness as the memories danced just beyond reach. Part 4. The Journey Home. The turning point came when winter melted into spring, and Ethan could no longer ignore the ache in his chest. He resolved to travel back to his hometown, a risk, but the gnawing need to know weighed heavier than his fear of the unknown. He packed his belongings, adding a few foraged supplies and a small bundle of cherished photographs showing Claire during happier times, and the journey south was laden with trepidation. He retraced his steps through the dense wilderness, where familiar landmarks that had once evoked joy now presented challenges. With the sun beaming overhead, he traversed valleys and climbed hills, each step echoing the rhythm of his determination. Though forest around him became both a friend and an adversary, in the first few days he moved with purpose, recalling the patterns of his dreams. However, as he journeyed deeper into the emptiness, fatigue set in. Alone with his thoughts, Ethan's mind flooded with panic as he wrestled with the potential outcomes. What if all he found was another silence, the remnants of a life once lived? What if Claire was gone, snuffed out by the same darkness that engulfed the world? Those questions haunted him, echoing in the quiet of the trees. Weeks drifted by like leaves in the wind. The spring rains turned the paths muddy and unforgiving. There were nights lost beneath the stars, filled with the quiet hum of loneliness and fleeting hope. Each day brought him closer to the truth, but also an increasing weight of uncertainty. Ethan rested under the shelter of towering fir trees, his heart heavy with the burden of his memories. Finally, he reached the outskirts of his hometown, where nature had reclaimed what had once stood proud. The sight struck him, a landscape, overgrown, familiar yet foreign. As he wandered the streets, he found nothing but silence. The homes were empty shells, devoid of life, shadowed by the trappings of nature's reclamation. The hollow pain in his chest intensified with every step until he stood before the house he had shared with Claire. The once vibrant red door hung crooked on its hinges, the windows dark and void. Ethan's heart raced as he approached, hope battling despair. Maybe they had evacuated. Maybe they were just gone for a moment. But as he surveyed the area, panic set in. The charred remains of their home lay before him, a once safe sanctuary reduced to a smoldering ruin. The memories that had lived within those walls were now mere ashes. Ethan stumbled back, grappling with the reality of what he had found. The cries of anguish bubbling at the back of his throat remained unfurled, a visceral grief ripped through him as he sifted through the detritus, the remnants of his life together. Eager hands clawed at the earth, searching for any sign of Claire, but all he grasped were the memories of laughter, echoes of love, and the heavy silence that followed. Part 5. Acceptance and return devastation swept over him, paralyzing his senses. He had come all this way, and the world he sought, filled with laughter, hope, and warmth, was nothing but a memory. He felt hollow, as if his very essence had been drained away. The ache in his chest ached like an open wound. As the sun began to set, painting the sky with swathes of orange and pink, Ethan recognized the futility of his search. The once clear path home had turned into shadows that plagued him. In that hour, he made the choice to turn back, not toward others but toward the solitude he had known. Back to the shelter of the forest he had begun to call home. With a heavy heart, he gathered the remnants of himself and walked away from the charred ruins. The cabin had become a haunting memory, a shrine to what once was. He would return north, away from the desolation he had faced, back to the embracing arms of the forest. He retraced his steps through the woods, memories of their shared lives intermingling with the sounds of nature. The whispers of the trees and the rustling leaves enveloped him, offering a strange comfort against the cacophony of loss. Each step northward was drenched in sorrow, but within it blossomed a fragile seed of acceptance. The forest was his refuge, the place where he had crafted a new life away from the shadows of grief. Even in solitude, the beauty of nature breathed life into him. Ethan found solace in knowing that although Claire was gone, her spirit lingered in the sun filtering through the leaves, in the melodies of the birds that sang above, and in the rustle of the wind that wrapped around him like an embrace. Part 6. Life in Solitude. After days of wandering, Ethan finally arrived at his log cabin, which stood resolute against the backdrop of towering pines. He felt a mix of relief and sorrow as he opened the door to the solitude he had chosen. Dust motes danced in the beams of sunlight filtering through the windows, a bittersweet reminder of the life he had once envisioned. Life resumed its rhythm, but this time, it was tempered with acceptance. He threw himself into the work of living simply. The forest became his companion. He nurtured a fire that crackled against the cold, hunted for food, and walked the trails that felt both familiar and foreign. The nights were often long, stretching endlessly as memories washed over him like waves upon a shore. The laughter of friends and loved ones echoed in the quiet, but he learned to find peace within the silence. Instead of drowning in despair, he began to listen to the sounds of nature that had once offered him solace, letting them fill the void left by human connection. As the seasons shifted once again, Ethan realized that he could not change the past. Claire and their future together lingered in his mind, but his heart learned to embrace the present, each day a step forward, a breath of life in the dwelling he had built by hand. He wandered the woods at dawn, drawing strength from the world around him, nurturing the connection he had formed with the trees, the river, and the wildlife. The profound solitude seeped into his bones, grounding him, and as he sat by the fire at night, he sometimes spoke her name into the stillness, a soft acknowledgement of the love that would never fade. In his heart, Ethan found an unshakable resolve. He would carry the memory of Claire with him, not as an anchor dragging him into despair, but as a light illuminating the path forward. The forest whispered its promise to him, a sanctuary, a place to heal. Ethan breathed in the cool, crisp air, closing his eyes to the embrace of nature that cradled him. He chose to stay, an inhabitant of the wild, a keeper of memories and a seeker of peace in the solitude he had forged. And with each passing day, the whispers of the forest grew louder, reminding him that in loss, there is also life, and in solitude, there blooms the promise of a new beginning.